For most of last season, Oscar Piastri looked like the future world champion of Formula One. He led the championship for 15 rounds, controlled races with calm precision, and appeared to be the sharp edge of McLaren's resurgence. But as the pressure rose and the title fight intensified, something strange began to happen inside the papaya garage, and Piastri's momentum quietly collapsed. What followed was a sequence of controversial team orders, confused strategy calls, and public backlash that dragged McLaren's internal politics into the spotlight. Now, months later, Piastri has finally spoken openly about those decisions, admitting that McLaren's attempt to be fair may have cost him a championship. And with 22.6 approaching fast, the question is no longer what went wrong, but whether McLaren can afford to repeat it. Subscribe now, because this story isn't just about last season. It's about how one decision, one philosophy, and one unresolved rivalry could define the next era of Formula One. McLaren's papaya rules were born from an idealistic belief that two elite drivers could fight for a world championship without hierarchy, politics, or favoritism. In a sport infamous for ruthless prioritization, McLaren wanted to be different, but Oscar Piastri's recent comments quietly confirm what many suspected last season, that neutrality, when taken too far, can become its own form of damage. For much of the year, Piastri was not just competitive. He was leading the championship. 15 rounds at the top is not an accident. Its dominance sustained across circuits, conditions, and pressure. Yet the moment McLaren entered the sharp end of the title fight, its internal decision-making began to fracture. The team wasn't choosing sides, but it also wasn't choosing decisively. And in Formula One, hesitation is often more costly than bias. The unraveling began in Monza. The order for Piastri to surrender second place to Norris was framed as restoring fairness after a slow pit stop. But strategically, it set a precedent. From that point onward, Piastri's races were no longer judged purely on performance, but on how outcomes might affect Norris. That subtle shift matters. Drivers feel it, momentum feels it, confidence feels it. What followed was a pattern, not a coincidence. In Singapore, McLaren hesitated over penalizing Norris for forcing Piastri towards the wall, a moment that should have been clear-cut. In Qatar, fear of disadvantaging Norris in a double-stack scenario led to a disastrous call to leave both cars out under an early safety car. Piastri lost what should have been a dominant victory, not because of pace, but because the team was paralyzed by its own philosophy. This is the core contradiction of the papaya rules. By trying to protect both drivers equally, McLaren ended up protecting neither properly. And crucially, the cost was not shared evenly. Piastri bore the brunt. Strategically, this imbalance extended earlier in the season. In Hungary, Norris was handed a one-stop strategy after a poor start, a gamble that paid off spectacularly. Piastri, running a more conventional approach, watched his teammate benefit from flexibility that wasn't reciprocated later when the championship tightened. None of this proves intentional favoritism, but it does demonstrate inconsistency. And inconsistency is poison in a title fight. The backlash grew so loud that it spilled beyond the paddock and into Australian politics. That alone shows how emotionally charged Piastri's near miss became. And yet, Piastri's public response has been revealingly restrained. He doesn't accuse, he doesn't attack. Instead, he acknowledges that things could have been handled better, a phrase that in elite sport is often more damning than outright criticism. Because behind closed doors, McLaren has now admitted the same thing. When Piastri says the papaya rules became more trouble than they were worth, he is confirming an internal shift. Andrea Stella's promise to streamline decision-making isn't just about speed. It's about authority, about clarity, about recognizing that a championship battle between teammates cannot be managed like a philosophical experiment. The consequences of last season weren't just strategic, they were psychological. After Azerbaijan, his worst race, Piastri entered a 6-round no-podium run. During the Americas leg, he hemorrhaged 46 points to Norris. The title didn't slip away in one dramatic moment. It bled out through a series of small, compounding blows. Some were his fault. Many weren't. All of them mattered. And still, he lost the championship by just 13 points. That statistic reframes everything. Remove even one controversial call. Monza, Qatar, Hungary, and history may look very different. This was a driver out of his depth. This was a driver learning the brutal reality of Formula One. That talent alone doesn't win titles. Structures do. Systems do. Teams do. Martin Brundle's assessment adds weight to this. He doesn't see a broken driver, he sees one sharpened by loss. Piastri knows where he must improve. Low-grip circuits, tire extraction, managing chaotic weekends. But just as importantly, McLaren knows where it must improve. managing internal rivalry when the stakes are absolute. The tension inside McLaren didn't explode overnight. It built slowly, almost invisibly, through radio messages that sounded harmless on the surface and strategy calls that felt just slightly off in the moment. To the outside world, the papaya rules still looked fair. Inside the cockpit, they felt anything but. For a driver leading the championship, uncertainty is corrosive. Every lap becomes a calculation not just against rivals, but against your own pit wall. This uncertainty subtly reshaped Piastri's approach. Where instinct once guided his racing, caution began to creep in. Decisions that had previously been automatic now carried political weight. Push too hard, and you risk compromising the team narrative. Yield too easily, and momentum slips away. In a championship fight decided by margins, that mental friction is devastating. What makes this collapse so difficult to quantify is that it never appears as a single mistake on paper. Lap times don't suddenly fall off a cliff. Pace doesn't vanish. Instead, opportunity evaporates. A safety car no longer becomes a gift. A bold strategy call turns conservative. The driver still performs, but the ceiling lowers, quietly and relentlessly. And that is where McLaren's philosophy ultimately failed its lead contender. Formula One history is ruthless in this regard. Every championship-winning team eventually chooses clarity over comfort. Red Bull did it, Mercedes did it, Ferrari, even in its chaos, understands it. McLaren tried to delay that choice, believing balance could be maintained indefinitely. Heading into 2026, the context changes dramatically. New regulations, a reset competitive order, a season that begins on Piastri's home soil, and two McLaren drivers who finished the previous year with identical win counts. Equality on paper is no longer enough. When both drivers are championship caliber, philosophy must give way to execution. The papaya rules era isn't being refined, and if McLaren fails to learn the correct lesson, 2026 won't just be another missed opportunity. It will confirm that the team still hasn't decided whether it wants harmony or titles. In Formula One, you rarely get to choose both. So, as Formula One returns to Melbourne to open the 2026 season, the real question isn't whether Oscar Piastri is ready to fight back. It's whether McLaren is finally ready to choose clarity over comfort. Because next time, losing by 13 points won't feel like bad luck. It'll feel like a warning ignored. What do you think? Should McLaren fully abandon the papaya rules in 2026, or is controlled rivalry still their best weapon? But championships don't wait for consensus. They reward decisiveness. By the time McLaren realized neutrality had become a liability, the margins were already gone. Not through malice, not through favoritism, but through hesitation. The one mistake Formula One never forgives. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos.